And we're pleased to have join us now author Charles Wheelan, who has written this book, The Centrist Manifesto. Here's the cover. Mr. Wheelan, is this a call for a third party?
It is a call for a third party and or a third party movement. Just something that empowers people in the center to kind of recapture the process. We couldn't be talking about this at a better time, given what just happened in Congress, the looming showdown, those kinds of things. And one would argue, certainly I would, that the tails have captured the process and the folks in the middle have been disempowered. This is a call and a strategy to kind of recapture some political strength for the middle, which is where most Americans are and even more are going.
A lot of people just heard your answer, and a lot of people are saying, been there, done that.
But we've been there, done that from the extremes. They're thinking, oh my God, Ralph Nader just messed it up in Florida and everything. Ralph Nader was not in the middle. They're thinking, if they're history buffs, which they might well be, they're thinking Teddy Roosevelt and the Bull Moose Party. We have third-party movements, and they tend to do two things, both of which I think are a mistake. One is they tend to come from outside the mainstream. So if you think of voters as kind of the bell curve, which I do because I also wrote a book about statistics, most people are in the middle, but if you've got a third-party movement coming from the tail, then that is a completely different dynamic. We're talking about coming from the middle. And second, people focus on the presidency, which is a fool's errand. With the Electoral College, there is no way a third-party movement is going to win the presidency in the near term. And they're not going to do well in the House either with the gerrymandering. The strategy in the book is all built around the U.S. Senate, which is to say, if you can muster some centrist strength in a handful of states, and there are now 22 states that have a senator from one party and a senator from the other, or a governor from one and a senator from the other. So we know these are places where the folks in the middle make the difference. If you could run a centrist in an open seat, and you know what the two parties are going to do in an open seat, they're going to go to their primaries. In the primaries, they're going to talk crazy talk. The Democrats are going to say things that they're going to try and walk back. The Republicans are going to say things that they're going to walk back. And they're going to expect that they can do the Etch-a-Sketch. This is what Mitt Romney has given us. The kind of, boy, I didn't really mean that. But instead, there will be a centrist candidate in the middle. And all that person has to do is hold 34% of the vote, not 50%. And you've got a centrist senator. That's not nearly as hard as trying to win the presidency.
In your view, Mr. Wheelan, has the two-party system always been broken?
No, I think there have actually been times, particularly in the Senate, where we had working groups, bipartisan working groups, the gang of something, and you still see it to this day. And a lot of really good legislation came out of those working groups. I do think there was a period, must have been about the late 90s, when you had a mass series of retirements. It was Bill Bradley, Nancy Kassenbaum, a handful of other relatively moderate senators from both sides. And I think when we lost those folks, and when we started seeing more partisanship writ large, the Senate lost some of its ability to do that. But when it's working well, you still see the best of the U.S. government coming out of the Senate and coming out of those bipartisan working groups. I just want to inject more centrist voices so that the gang of 6 becomes the gang of 12.
Charles Wheelan is our guest. The Centrist Manifesto is the name of the book. Here it is. We're going to put the phone lines up on the screen if you'd like to participate in our conversation here on Book TV. 202 is the area code, 585-3890 for those of you in the East and Central time zones, 585-3891. If you live in the Mountain and Pacific time zones, you could also make a comment on our Facebook page or on our Twitter page, twitter.com/booktv, facebook.com/booktv. What's your background, Mr. Wheelan, that you're writing a book about the centrist?
So my background essentially forced me to write this book. This was a book that I almost wrote by accident. I was kind of getting madder, making more notes. There are probably 3 salient experiences. One is my very first job out of college was writing speeches for Jock McKernan, probably better known now as Olympia Snow's husband, who was at the time governor of Maine.
A Democrat.
No, he was a Republican, but he was one of the last, he was a New England Republican, a Rockefeller Republican, a moderate Republican, pro-choice, very involved in K through 12 education. On paper now, you would say a Democrat, but really fiscally conservative, the old breed of Republicans who are perhaps being hunted to extinction. So after that, I went back and became really a policy person. So I have a PhD in public policy. I wrote for The Economist. So I'd been involved in politics. Now I was watching it as an outsider and then studying it. So thinking about everything through the lens of how do you actually fix Social Security and so on. And then the last piece was I was a candidate. So I was in Chicago for almost 20 years, happily teaching. And so, well, Obama gets elected, and then more relevant, he appoints Rahm Emanuel as his chief of staff. Rahm was my congressman. There was nobody queued up to replace him. Everybody thought he was going to be there for a lifetime. Rod Blagojevich, governor of Illinois, had just been indicted, which was relevant because all the usual Chicago politicians just froze in place. So there's no anointed successor, no machine. And the last piece is we just elected president, a guy who taught at the University of Chicago. And I said, wait a minute, I teach at the University of Chicago. So I decided that if I was going to care about this stuff, I ought to at least be willing to get in the ring. So I ran for that seat as a fiscally conservative Democrat. So really my politics hadn't moved very far from the speech writing for Jock McKernan days, but I'm now in the other party, and I realized there were incidents where I can't get out of a Democratic primary, where I'd go into the endorsement sessions with the teachers unions, and they would say, well, how do you feel about performance-based pay? I have a wife who ran a software company and then became a math teacher in an inner city school, so I know a lot about inner city education. I said, you know, I think performance-based pay and some other things are an important piece of what we got to do. And then there's just a silence. And you know, be like, right now, if I said something so offensive, it's like, okay, well, you got 15 more minutes, we don't really have to use it. And it's just like, okay, well, you're not going to endorse me. I can't win this primary. And I realized I was a person without a party, and I was not crazy. There are a lot of other people like me out there. And so it's that combination of experiences that drove me to this.
Charles Wheelan is our guest. How do you define a centrist? Walk us through an issue.
So centrist is not just a series of muddling compromises, although there does have to be a certain pragmatism involved, but it is a handful of things that I would argue take the best of each party. And there are a lot of good things about both parties. So what do we like about the Democrats? Well, I think their heart is in the right place. So I think the richest country in the history of civilization should have a meaningful safety net, but it should be targeted for poor people, not corn farmers, right? Not corporations. So take the welfare spending and channel it to people who need it most. I think the Democrats are right on the environment. I don't think they're terribly effective in what they propose, but they're certainly relative to the Republicans. We should be doing something about environmental responsibility. I think the Republicans are right on the fiscal issues. I don't think they're going about it the right way. I don't think they've actually done much about it. They talk a good talk, but George W. Bush was not exactly fiscally conservative when you look at the math. But that idea is important, and there are a lot of Republicans who care a lot about that. So if you just take a couple simple concepts, so fiscal responsibility, we've got to get the long-term books in balance. Environmental responsibility, so just with those two bumper stickers, I've eliminated both parties. I would argue neither party at its base is fiscally responsible and environmentally responsible. And they make sense together, right? They're both about not living better today at the expense of tomorrow. I would throw in social tolerance, and I think that means both being pro-gay marriage, because it doesn't realistically affect people who are not involved in the marriage. But I would also say it means if you want to have a gun in your home, you can have a gun in your home. That also doesn't affect anybody outside. As soon as you take the gun outside, then we need to talk, right? So social tolerance, and then I would say a genuine commitment to economic opportunity. And I think both parties talk that game, neither party has delivered. But we really have to get back to a place in the face of income inequality and a precarious middle class where we offer an opportunity for everybody who's born in the country. That's it.
Robert in Jackson, Tennessee, you're the first call up today with Charles Wheelan. Hi.
Yeah, good morning. I tuned in kind of just in the last 10 minutes, but you know, living in a West Tennessee area, in the South has many small cities, I think we are more conservative. We're always perceived that, but we have a movement in West Tennessee right now called Constitutional Party, and we're focusing on moderate Senator Lamar Alexander. And, you know, a lot of us just feel like a small minority are making the decisions for the entire country, even in both parties. And, you know, how do you see that attitude of us that we feel like, you know, nobody listens to us?
Well, I think part of what's going on is you've got a primary process that empowers a minority in each party. So who shows up in primary elections? Well, it's the base. It's the people we talk about. Their opinions are not always in sync with the electorate, but those are the folks who are choosing who are on the ballot. They're also the folks, by the way, who are waiting in the wings to knock off any incumbent who has the audacity, and I would argue the wisdom, to make a compromise on some of the things that we actually have to do. So as long as the folks who are showing up in primaries, giving the money, the base, if you will, are the ones who determine who we get to pick from on the general election ballot, then we're going to continue to get a system that is polarized